All right, it looks like we are live. I'm so excited for this conversation because of how important it is. I'm going to let just people trickle in a little bit, but Sania Mayo, Dr. Sania Mayo, thank you so much for making the time today.
Thank you for having me.
My
Important.
pleasure. I'm so glad. I don't even know how we connected on Instagram. I just started following you at some point because of some of the things you were talking about. And then sure enough, when this time came, I was like, what was her name again? Let me go find her because I know we had talked or DM'd a few times. I'm going to just go ahead and let people trickle in as they do, but I want to do a quick intro so people know who you are. We didn't plan to match today, but I feel like that means we're on the same
Right.
wavelength.
Right.
Exact same color blue. So thank you for everybody that's trickling in. Today, my guest is Dr. Sania Mayo. She is the CEO of Simple Solutions Psychotherapy and Girls Gossip and Women Network LLC. She's also a motivational speaker and author of Transition of a Butterfly. Dr. Mayo, thank you so much for making the time today. I first want people to get a sense of who you are, your personal background, and maybe what led you into your profession.
So my personal background was I was a teen mom, which made me want to help people even more just based on my own personal experiences. I went to school. My undergrad was actually in administration of justice. I wanted to be a probation officer to work with at-risk youth. And I've always been the go-to person where people will come to me for advice since I was a kid. And when I interned at the probation department, I realized I wasn't a paper pusher. And that led me to pursue the career of mental health and, getting to help people because that's what I'm all about. I love helping others.
I love it. One of the things that we talked about, and it's the title of our conversation as well, is this idea, particularly in the Black and immigrant communities, we're often taught survival, but not so much taught the tools of preventive rather, mental health. What do you mean by that?
When I say survival, when something happens, I don't think we allow ourselves to break down or we don't allow ourselves to basically feel. And I'll give you two examples. I remember when I was 12 years old, and at 12, I didn't realize when my brother passed away, I didn't think to mourn. It was more of, is my mom okay? She's dealing with my sister. So I need to be a good child to make sure that I don't cause any more stress for my mother. The other day, my employee, she came into my office and she asked to speak to me. And I could tell something was wrong just by the way she was looking. And she went over the handbook, right? She went through the handbook and told me that she knew that based on the circumstances, she didn't qualify to take off, but she had just lost a loved one. And so that's survival. We think about what needs to be done before we allow ourselves to grieve. And of course, I let her take the time off and asked her how much time she needed. But it just made me reflect on when things happen, we say it's okay to not be okay. But do we really mean that? Because when something happens, we go into survival versus I need to grieve, I need to mourn, I need to heal. We think about what we need to do versus what we need to do here first.
Oh, that is so true. The space is not even there if you hold a somewhat regular job and you may get bereavement time off, you may not. You may be thinking about, not getting paid during that time. And so that's just something that you have to consider. When my dad passed away in 2019, I had to be in Ethiopia for a few weeks to a month because the job was new. It was unpaid at the time. My bosses were amazing and so supportive. But when I came back, I just had to start working because of my own finances. I had spent so much money when nothing was coming in, and you just dive in. And so how many times are people doing that? And what is the impact of that as time goes on?
It's detrimental, right? Because there is no right or wrong way to grieve, right? There is no right or wrong way to grieve, but there is a definition of grieving in a detrimental way. For example, so I just got a call last week about a family member and it caught me off guard. And the first thing I thought was because I was loud and it, I'm a person, I'm a therapist, but I'm a person first. So I had to go outside and then cry, get myself together, and come in. And so my first thought was, okay, I could either grieve right now, and shut everything down, but my employees need a paycheck. This is how they pay their rent. This is how they survive. And so, one of the tools that I've taught myself is grieving in moments, right? And
Mhm.
so, I allow myself to cry in that moment, but then I get myself together to do what I need to do. Like as a mother wouldn't be able to just let herself go because then she has kids to care for. So there's that sense of balance. We have to grieve, but then we also have to survive. So we have to teach ourselves or get the tools to understand, yeah, it's okay to not be okay, but at what point does it become detrimental? But if we just stay in that survival place over time, then if we stay in that survival place over time, it will become detrimental because then when do we heal self?
Yeah, I would think that people do just stay in that survival space because they don't feel like, okay, if I let go now, am I going to be able to stop crying? So you just kind of, you're wound up and you're like, I'm just going to keep pushing through. We've seen our parents do it uh, under multiple crises, like you said. And I'm so sorry to hear that you lost your brother at the age of 12. That is such a huge thing to undertake at that age. But often in Black and immigrant communities, there's multiple crises happening at the same time, whether it's because there's not a second parent that can be there, whether it's because they're overseas, whether it's because money is just really tight. Um, our parents, as great as they want to be, they just may not have the bandwidth to completely deal with whatever new crisis or latest crisis there is. So for you, what was it like to go through it? And you've touched on it. And then at what point did you realize, I have not dealt with this at all? And I believe you said that's what sort of led you into your professional path.
So when I was growing up, now depression is something that people are starting to take notice to. But when I was growing up, to be depressed, what did that mean? That wasn't even a common word used. Depression wasn't thrown around in casual conversation as it is today. And so even though I was depressed, I didn't realize I was depressed. And I would have teachers say things like, your behavior changed or you're different. And I didn't understand what that meant because to me, I was still the same person. And there's 5 stages of grief. There's denial, there's depression, there is acceptance. My
I,
mind is
I
going
know,
in a
I know, I forget them too. I think everyone knows them generally.
and
Anger, the negotiation. I think the
yes,
anger.
okay,
Yeah.
anger negotiation is the two that I forgot. But I stayed in denial for 7 years, from 12 to 19, because my brother was always at his friend's house. And that was my survival. That I made myself believe that my brother was away, but he was still here. And that was the way I coped. I also
Mhm.
cope by poetry, um, by writing. And I didn't know it was a coping skill at the time, but thinking back now, that's how I cope. I was writing poetry and I made myself mentally believe that it was at his friend's house. And it wasn't until I was 19 that I broke down and really was like, my brother's gone. But it took 7 years to come to that realization because I was surviving. I was trying to hold it together for everyone else, and it was actually detrimental to me. And growing up in certain atmospheres, you're taught that. I remember a traumatic event. I was 3 years old when I first was in the presence of a murder, and it happened at my babysitter's house, and I was in the house. And my first thought, and I remember this vividly, at 3 years old, was I tried to, should I jump out the window? I looked down, it was the I knew I couldn't make it and I hid in the closet. And you're taught survival skills at a very young age, depending on the environment that you are raised in. And so you sometimes don't know how to cope. If no one ever taught you coping skills or what that looks like, it's almost like second nature just to survive because that's all we know how to do. Mental health is new. I remember when I graduated in 2013, I was so mad. I was upset. And I thought I chose the wrong field because mental health was so downplayed. It was so overlooked. We didn't even get paid right. Well, still don't, but that's a different conversation for our profession. And so I kind of thought I made the wrong decision, because when you talked about mental health, people were just like, well, get over it. Well, that's just weakness, you know. So growing up in certain environments, to say you had depression or to even have those conversations were viewed as a weakness. So what do? I don't tell anyone. And I think that's something that's happening now. People are suffering in silence because they don't want to be viewed a certain way. Even though mental health is at the forefront of conversations, it's sad to know in 2022 we still describe mental health as someone being crazy. Or when we say someone has killed someone, when there's a school shooter, it's mental health. And there's so much more to mental health than suicide or killing. It could just be everyday stressors, because this is our mental health. Is it healthy? And so
Mm.
it has a negative connotation attached to it, which makes people suffer in silence and just survive.
Yeah, and often once we talk about it, people aren't usually talking about it while they're going through it. They're maybe writing about it in retrospect. You know, it's all buttoned up in the form of a book or a movie or whatever it is. So what they're talking about, you don't always really get like how bad it actually was for them in that moment. Something, a word that we hear a lot, and I would actually like to know how you might define it, and I'm at least in part, what is depression? What are signs that somebody might be depressed or that you might be depressed?
I think the first sign of depression is isolation. Um, Sometimes people will not engage in certain activities that were fun to them before, or you start, you know, the frequency of hearing from them may decrease. They may gain weight or lose weight. Just many different factors that can kind of tell, but sometimes people hide it. You know, sometimes people show up with a smile because they don't want you to know what they're going through. I teach my clients all the time about healthy vulnerability, right? To be vulnerable is courageous, but you also have to understand the space and the people that you're being vulnerable with. You should never feel be vulnerable in a place or in a space or with a person that you can't trust. And so many times people don't know if they can trust that information, because if I tell you I'm depressed, if I tell you I self harm and cut myself up the night before, is it going to be used against me? And I think we need to create an environment or a culture or a family of supporting people and saying it's okay when they do have those behaviors, instead of saying they're crazy.
Yeah, or instead of even being like, I think maybe alarmist about it. I mean, if everybody seems to be dealing with with something, then when someone says, "I feel like I'm struggling emotionally or mentally," usually like even from the people that care about you, they're like, "Wait, what? And it's just like this what like everybody is going through something at some point or the other, and so I think there's this sense that if I say I'm struggling, like something's going to shift in people's perspective, and it's going to be like, oh, is she going to be able to keep it together, or is he going to be able to keep it together? And it's like people still go through power through their jobs, different events, feeling that way, so we might as well give them the space to talk about it, right?
Yeah, but I think you hit on a valid point with image. We're a society today where everything is image, everything is how I'm viewed, perception. And so, is it okay for me to show that I'm going through something? I think I'm a very, very strong person, right? But I'm okay with being vulnerable in safe spaces and with safe people. But I'm not worried about the image when I'm struggling, right? Because we all go through things. Life is going to bring some sort of stress at some time. It's not the stress, it's about how we deal with it. But I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, it's a very tricky thing, especially in the age of social media and et cetera, et cetera. Somebody asked, I think, a really good question. How can you convince somebody to see a professional?
Hmm. It's not even about convincing. I get that question a lot. Or people say, can you show up at my house and do an intervention? Or how can we trick a family
Right.
member to therapy? And I'm not into tricking anyone for to do anything. Because this is the thing, in order for someone to get help, they have to first identify themselves that there's a problem, right? They have to acknowledge that there's a problem, because it's kind of like going to school and you're in a college class and you show up every day, but you don't do the work, nothing's going to change. It's the same thing as therapy. You could come to therapy, but if you don't acknowledge what's going, because you can come to therapy and lie. I'm gonna give you a prime example. So if I go to the doctor and I have a broken leg, they can do an x-ray and show that I have a broken leg. But if you come into my office and you tell me what I want to hear, what you think I want to hear, there's no x-ray or a way that I can determine that you're dealing with something without you acknowledging telling me. So yeah, you can get someone to therapy, but to open up and be vulnerable in that safe space to get the help they need is something that they have to want. Healing is something that you have to want. Therapy is something that you have to want.
Wow, that is so interesting. Yeah, I'm sure there is, sort of not wanting to be completely real, even in the space with a therapist, because you don't know if you like your therapist, trust your therapist until a certain point. One of the things that we talked about is emotional intelligence. How would you define it?
Ooh. Emotional intelligence is knowing emotions. And this is something that, because we always use the term I do. I'm going to say I do. I can't say we, I do. I used to say I feel like, but it wasn't an emotion. That I feel
Mm,
like would be a statement, right? Or an opinion. And I don't think we have learned to identify an emotion. I feel angry because I am sad, because I am frustrated, because an emotional intelligence, I believe, is teaching people to identify those feelings so that we know what you're going through.
Yeah, I mean, as simple as that sounds, I think that we've gotten so far away from even talking about emotions. Even when we're talking about like big issues, whether it's politics or social justice issues, people are sort of, I guess the one word is maybe angry, or they sort of take their energy out into whatever advocacy that they're doing. But if you probably really dig deep, like there's a personal hurt in there that they're not expressing, and it's kind of being covered up by the latest story in the news cycle or whatever advocacy that they've decided to take on. So how do we what are some of the words that you eventually get your clients to be able to say that they weren't willing to say when they first came to you?
So we teach emotions, right? And so we go back to the basics as if we were working with a toddler or a little kid and have them identify emotion. Because a client may come in and they say something like, I'm just so over this situation, whatever it may be. Okay. But attach a feeling to what you're saying. And being a therapist, you can't imagine how hard that is for a lot of people to identify an emotion to what they're saying. And so teaching them the basics. Okay, I'm angry. Now, what does that look like? And how do we resolve it? What is the solution to it?
Yeah, that sort of leads us to expression, right? One of the stories that just really made me want to get this conversation going is the suicide death of Chesley Christ. And then days before that, actress Regina King's son, Ian Alexander, also died from suicide. And it's like, what is going on? Like, we've been talking about the stats going up with suicide. COVID didn't help anybody because a lot of people became more isolated, job issues, etc. Yet we stayed connected on social media, and there's this sense that people are expressing themselves, but yet we're seeing mental health really decline. So what is I think, and this is the one thing we were talking about on the phone too, is there's this sense of expression, but people are kind of half saying things or partly saying things. One of the last posts from former Miss USA Chesley Chris was something along the lines of, "I hope you find peace today." Right. And then hours later, she's found dead by suicide. It's just like, you look at that post and it doesn't signal something that serious, but how many of those posts that we're seeing actually have such heaviness behind them?
So there are posts that have heaviness behind them, but there are also posts that are subliminals. And it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of hard to decipher between the two unless you know the person on a personal level. Because sometimes we don't know what a post means. But I think we have an obligation as a society, and first and foremost, as a family and a friend, to the people that we have relationships with. One of the biggest things, and another thing I was telling you on the phone, is how we ask just as a formality, how are you doing? Or how are you? Right? It's like almost like a conversation opener. But do we really care? Probably not. We say it as if it's a form of a sentence. How are you? How are you doing? To open it up to then say what we want to say. And so if a person stopped and you asked the person, how are you? And they really gave it you all of what they were dealing with, would you really want to hear it? And I think we need to be more open to getting past the mask of social media and posts and different things like that, and really checking in on people and say, no, I'm saying, how are you? And you're saying fine, because that's usually fine or blessed or whatever the response is. But then really coming back and saying, no, I'm really asking, how are you?
Mhm. So would you or do you suggest to your clients taking some time off of social media? Um,
Always,
Always,
always.
yeah. I used to think that the impact of it was overrated in terms of the negative impact, but I actually think it's severely underrated, don't you?
It's very underrated. I'm on my phone now.
What
Let me
is that?
see.
Oh, is that telling you how long you're on per
If
day?
this goes
20
over 30 minutes average daily, that's a problem for me, right?
Wow.
As a consumer, that is a problem for me because I'm not handling business on social media. Now, if you're handling business on social media, then I understand it. And the thing is, what are you following, right? Now, if you're
Mhm.
following motivational stuff, positive stuff, things that are going to boost morale, go for it. But if it's negativity, if it's drama, then maybe you should kind of minimize what you're putting in because what you put in comes out. And have you ever just been, listening to someone and they're just negative, and then all of a sudden you're negative, or you're listening to a song and it may be negative, and now you're having negative thoughts? I'm big on what you feed yourself, right? Because this is our mental state, this is our mental health. What are we feeding our mind? What are we putting in? If we put negativity in, how do you think that's going to play internally? And so I'm big on taking social media breaks. I monitor myself. If that goes over 30 minutes, that's a
Mm.
problem for me because what am I doing on social media all day or that long? And typically, to be honest, most of the time we just pick up our phone and out of habit,
It's
and we're just
automated.
sitting there and we just go to social media. We're not doing anything, we're not looking at anything. But what if we implemented or substituted that habit for a positive habit, or going and stand in the mirror and doing positive affirmations, or just calling and checking on people and say, how are you doing? If that was a habit, how far would we be?
Yeah, I think that's, since we're talking about tools of preventive mental health, there you go. This is one that's very difficult for me. In recent months, my job has sort of changed. And so I'm really plugged in. There's a lot of positivity, but also a lot of negativity that comes with that. And I wish I was on for only 30 minutes a day. I'm even scared to look at it. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people. And the reality of it is it has an impact. I have felt it. I've seen other people sort of go through it. So just to sort of highlight so that people have something to take away from this, whatever you think you're doing that's super important. I know right now there's a conflict in Ethiopia and there's just a lot of conversations around that. But at the end of the day, your own personal, emotional, and mental health is more important than anything else. And I say that really looking at myself, and I'm looking to find ways to kind of limit it, whether it's take off certain apps off my phone for a certain amount of part of the day, because I literally feel it. Like there's just something in my body that's just like becomes anxious after seeing so much negativity, even though in my head I'm like, I don't care what they're saying. I believe what I'm doing, or whatever the case.
You could get
How
caught up without, oh, I'm sorry, go
No, no,
ahead.
no. Please, you go. I was just running on.
No, 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 because what you're saying is true and people need to hear it, because you can get caught up without even getting caught up by watching certain things, and then an hour pass. You're like, wait a minute, I've been on my phone this long. And so it's easy to get caught up in it before saying, wait a minute. And
Hmm.
people like entertainment. We're lazy thinkers. We're lazy. We don't exercise the mind enough. I remember when I was younger, we used to go out and ride bikes and skating, and to be in the house was like torture. And so, it's lazy thinking. This is lazy to just pick this up and do this because it's entertaining. And we don't want to make those brain muscles work. So to just do this, it doesn't take much but the flip of a phone and use your finger.
Yeah, there's times where I've completely taken the app off, and then I find myself on my phone looking for the app. I'm like, what, you took it off for a reason today. It's not here. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, like there's just moments like that where you're like, so okay, there's a certain wiring that I'm not even conscious of, and it's almost scary.
Automatic,
It's
autopilot.
automated. Yeah, your fingers just start doing something. You're like, it's so
It's almost
crazy.
like second nature at this point. Social media, and I can't blame social media apps, right? A business is always going to look at their bottom line. They're always going to do things to make their consumers want whatever they're providing their product. And so, as the consumer, we have to be responsible because the business is doing their job. They're keeping you on their app. That's what they are supposed to do. But we have to look at it from a different perspective. And it's okay to be on if you're listening to positive things and things that are going to feed you. And I'm like an activist. So even when there's certain protests or different things going on, I have to step away from it because I find myself getting angry. I'm all for the
Mhm.
underdog and I get angry about injustices. And so, even though it's not necessarily negative, it takes my emotions to a different place. And I have to be responsible to say, okay, this is enough. I have to shut off.
Oh, that is so real. I remember when the George Floyd, I don't even know what to call it, murder happened. There was, I was working in local news. I was doing a story every day on it, trying to, dissect like what happened, how could this happen, what are the rules there, and it's something I wanted to do. And then the conversations would happen in my personal life. It was a time of COVID as well, and it was just a lot. Like I found myself just like shifting in mood. I saw that in other people and my friends. Got to the point sometimes I'm like, please stop sending me stuff. Like it's just, it is literally making me have a certain visceral reaction. And I want to be engaged, but I don't want to be so obsessed that it's actually detrimental to me. And I think social media has made activism very easy in terms of you don't always have to be out in the streets, so you're always doing it on your phone. So and I also wonder if like part of people's excessive engagement is maybe it's easier to feel like you're doing something in that space versus deal with your own stuff. um, I know it's not true for everybody, but it's sometimes it feels like you're over there trying to save the whole world, but there's some stuff at home that you should take care of, right? And I'm speaking to me too, and so it's not any judgment on anybody.
So, no judgment, but we have to be true. We have to be truthful. We have to be transparent. I don't believe in feeding the starving neighbors when the household is starving. And what I mean when I say that is, it would be hypocritical of me to have all these youth events to reach all these youth, and then my kid is struggling, right?
Mhm.
And so it starts in the home. And I think many times we distract to not even, I'm gonna take it more personal, to not deal with self. Because if I worry about what's going on next door, then that means I don't have to really sit down and sort through what's going on with me. And many times people don't like to identify the problem because if I identify the problem, that means I have to change something. And then you'll hear people say, well, that's just me. But is that okay? Like I could say I'm very assertive, right? I'm very direct. And so I'm straight to the point sometimes. And people would tell me, like, you don't even say hi, you just say what you're getting to. And at first, when I was very young, I would say, that's just me. But as I grew up and I got wiser, I had to understand That is me, but it's rude. And even though I am direct, I still have to be mindful of my audience. And many times we normalize dysfunctional behaviors and unhealthy behaviors within ourselves. And we distract by deflecting, by watching everyone else and
Mhm.
being involved in everything else, but being involved here first.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the hardest work. It's almost easier to
Very
just
hard.
it is. It's
Very hard.
you could be brilliant in your profession, be super talented as an artist or whatever the case. But when it comes to what do you think it is? Why is it so hard to kind of deal with ourselves? Is it because there's so much noise nowadays? Is it the lack of time to kind of deal? Is it distractions? Why do you think it's so difficult to kind of break through, even really know what you're feeling?
Because we don't like to admit that we are flawed. We don't like to admit that something is wrong. Because if something is wrong and we have flaws, we think that says something about us overall as a person, and it doesn't. I'm a therapist. I have multiple companies. I'm an author. I think I'm doing great in life, and I still have flaws, and that is okay. I have to admit to myself to be able to work on them. Just like with being the too direct. They tell me I'm bossy, right? And I had to learn to, okay, just because I'm like, we need to get stuff done. I like to play, but they know when it's time to work, it's time to work. But relaxing, I had to learn to relax. Is that a flaw? Yes, because sometimes people can see you as rigid. But I
Mhm.
had to be honest with myself. And that doesn't mean I'm a bad person or I'm an overall unhealthy or flawed person. But yes, there's things I need to work on. And I think we shy away from that because we don't just look and say, okay, I'm going to even give you a better example. Let's say a person dealing with self esteem issues, and let's say they don't like their lips. They don't just say, oh, embrace it. They just say the whole person is ugly.
Mhm.
I don't like my shoulders. The whole person is ugly. I don't like my hairstyle. They make it a whole instead of I have to deal with that particular issue. And
Mhm.
so that's why I believe we run away from self, because if I say that there is something wrong with self, what does that say about me as a whole? But that's a false narrative we've been telling ourselves for many years.
Yeah, it may be just a limitation of language, and the way people process language. When you say something, there's all this connotation that comes with it, whether it's you yourself judging it or somebody that's hearing it judging it. So then it makes people not want to deal with any particular part because it sounds like you're saying that there's a judgment on the whole. On the theme of tools, so one of the things is disconnect as much as possible, right? I think that's something everybody can, manage to do. And then you talked about, affirmations. Those are things I've done in periods where I'm probably the most grounded, and then they just get kind of lost by the wayside when I'm busy or whatever the case, and then that has an impact because I'm not filling in things. So in terms of tools, taking away some social media, what do we need to put in? What are some ways to kind of counter anything negative with positivity that can fill people?
Positive music, right? Positive music boosts morale. Positive conversations. Um, I find when people have goals and they're goal driven, they have something to focus on. So it's positive. So you're not being distracted and just getting caught up in the day to day. Because when you have a focus and you have something, a deadline or something that you're working on, you get self fulfillment or gratification, feeling good about yourself because you're actually working on something that's important to you. Surrounding yourself with people that are going to pull you to the carpet. And what I mean when I say that, people that are going to be tell you the truth, not what you want to hear, but be honest with you as friends to say, look, hey, there's something wrong or there's something going on or, this behavior is not okay. You want to surround yourself with people that are going to pour into you, right? And when I say pour into you, not take away. Many times, I'm a giver. I'm a giver. But when I started teaching men how to fish and when I stopped fishing for them, my phone stopped ringing. So what I
Oh,
realized in that was that people were taking and they weren't pouring back into me. And relationships should go two ways. You should pour, and then they should pour back. But when you're pouring and pouring and pouring, eventually your cup is going to run out. And so making sure that you have people that are replenishing you, that you're just not giving, but they're giving back.
Gosh, that's so interesting. I want to summarize some of the tools you talked about. If anyone has any questions, we have an actual licensed therapist today, so we'll take them. Yesterday, we were just more two girlfriends chatting. So go ahead and put them in the comments box. So music sounds so simple, but it's like it does something. And at times when I'm the busiest and stressed out, I will play a song and I'll be like, when was the last time I played music? Like I heard music. It'll be a month, it'll be 2 months, which is just so crazy to me. But that's something I recently noticed. Positive conversations, goals. And when you mean goals, I gather it could be very work centered, it could be hobby, it could be,
Anything,
personal, right?
anything. I make goals that's unrelated to work. Just tasks for me to get up and do something to keep my mind busy and focused on something positive. It doesn't even have to be work related. It could be, I'm going to have a goal to walk 2 blocks tomorrow. I'm going to have a goal to check in on this person tomorrow. I'm going to have a goal to do self care for me tomorrow. It could be anything, something that brings you self fulfillment, gratification, something healthy, healthy, something that is going to help you. So a goal can be anything. I want to go back to music though, because one of the things we do, we come in at 8. So from 8 to 8:45, we play gospel uplifting music to set the atmosphere.
I love
And
it.
then 8:45, before clients come in, we transition it to smooth jazz. But before they come, we are dealing with people that are coming in with issues. And so mentally, we need to be okay. And so setting the atmosphere, even at home, when I play certain music, it puts me in a certain mood. So music is huge.
That's so amazing. I don't think you saw the comment, but you answered their question. They said,
Oh,
what
okay,
did
because I can't.
Yeah, they literally said, "What do you mean about, or what do you mean by positive music?" There you go. Something that's not, there's some things that are subliminally negative, but if you feel good listening to it, then it's probably positive, right? But
It's
gospel.
whatever puts you, you know, in the mood. Like when I'm working out, I listen to a certain type of music because it pumps me up. It puts me in a positive mood. But there's also like I don't like oldies. My husband likes. I don't like oldies because I feel like many of them are depressing. And this is personally for me. You have to know what is good for you because what's good for you may not be good for someone else. But like listening to old music from childhood sometimes takes me to a negative headspace. I don't like to listen to it because it takes me back to the past. And some of those, so I'm a person that a scent can spark a memory for me, a song can spark a memory for me. And if it's something that I know that's going to be negative, I try to stay away from it. And so you have to know what is your definition of positivity for you. That's an individual thing because I can't say what's positive for you. Only you know that.
Right, exactly. For some people, it's, binge watching. Probably at some point that becomes unhealthy, but if that relaxes you, seems to be fine. From a professional perspective, we've talked about some healthy habits. Let's talk about some unhealthy ways of dealing. How big of a problem, because we've done these stories with my time at CBS LA, how big of a problem is self-medicating?
Very bad. Um, so when you self medicate, it's kind of like drinking alcohol or taking drugs. And that's why I'm an advocate for teaching skills. Now, there are some diagnoses that there needs to be medication and therapy combined, right? However, when you take medication or you self medicate, you're relying on a substance or a thing or a material possession to help you cope. I think it's even unhealthy to rely on a person to help you cope. Like it's okay to check on people, right? That's great. But if I need you, if I say, hey, I need you to come to my house every time I'm going through something, I'm being codependent and I'm relying on you to help me cope. And so what happens is You rely on a thing versus learning a skill to help you cope, which is a huge difference. And that is what therapy is. We're teaching you skills to deal with stressors that already are occurring or preventative before it even gets to that point.
Yeah, we only hear about it in the headlines when it gets to this horrific point where you're just like, wait, how? How was that person in that mental state where it felt like this was it, you know? And but it's that person is normal, they're high achieving, they come from good families. So if it can happen to them, it can happen
But
to
what does
anyone.
a good family mean? I don't like that. Tell my You're probably like, what
Yeah,
is
you know, again,
what
yeah,
is a good family? Because you can have all the money in the world, everything could look like it's perfect. But I've never seen a perfect family, because to see a perfect family means there are no problems or stressors, and that's just not true.
thank you for calling that out. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the my guest yesterday, Kiara Imani, was saying, I come from a family where both of my parents are, married, still married. I had a decent upbringing. Like I still am dealing with A, B, C, and D, right? So and then you see this in the high profile ones, it seems like they had everything, but again, mental health doesn't really care, right? What you have.
It doesn't have a look sometimes. And so I have clients, they'll come in, and I think it's so funny. So when they first come in, I'll ask about different things, and they say, I came from a good family, two-parent household, and they start naming all these things. And they said, we didn't have any issues. And then I'll start highlighting things. And then they're like, oh, because let me tell you something about dysfunction. We normalize it. How do we know something is dysfunction if we never had anything to compare it to? So if I'm raised in a two-parent household and my parents have a toxic relationship, yes, it's a two-parent household, but how do they communicate?
Mhm.
They argue at one another? Do they ignore each other? Do they avoid each other? Because all of that is playing in me as a kid, and I'm watching this. So it's a two-parent household, but what does that look like? Sometimes people tell me, this person has been married 30 years. That's great. The length, the frequency is great, but is it a healthy marriage? Because
Mhm.
that's what makes a difference. So I kind of laugh because I have people come in and they'll say, I didn't have any issues growing up in my household. Really? So let's dissect your household. Let's dissect the family unit, and then a light bulb goes off. So we all deal with things, and then you can grow up in a household with someone and have a total different experience than one of your siblings. Sometimes I listen to my siblings and I'm like, we in the same house, but that's their experience. It's not my experience.
So for those people that come in and they say, I don't have any, my family's fine, I don't have any issues. So are they coming in saying just my issues are just mine? And then you come to find out there's connections to their
I don't
upbringing?
think they know. It's kind of like turning on a light in a dark room, and then you see everything. And that's what I'm saying about normalizing unhealthy behaviors or dysfunction. Like, I may not know that, my sister isolating in her room all day, that she was depressed. She didn't show me she was depressed. I may not know that. I may not know that, when my dad spent nights away when he was out of town, that he was actually having I may not know that, right? Even though the information was there,
Mm.
that wasn't my normal. And so when you turn the light on and you start highlighting different things, people then realize I have normalized dysfunction. And it could be subtle things. It could be the way we communicate.
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. Okay, go ahead. I'm
No,
sorry.
please, no. You're the expert. I want to hear more.
So my son was like, I was with my mom and my sisters. And after we left, I couldn't talk. Like my voice was so hoarse because in my house, you can hear a pin drop. It's always quiet. And so I couldn't talk. I was like, what did I do that I can't speak? And it was, my son was 7 at the time. And he said, Mom, do you know that every time you guys get together, you scream?
Mm.
I had never realized it. And when I thought about it, Our form of communication was talking and screaming over each other to be heard, and it was unhealthy. And it took my 7-year-old son to highlight that to me for me to realize that wasn't okay and it wasn't healthy. And that's what I'm saying when I say we normalize things that we may not even realize something that we start doing that is unhealthy.
And that's the point of therapy, right? Once in a while, you'll get like a golden moment from a 7-year-old or some stranger that, sees something in you that you aren't seeing. But it seems like, and I've gone and talked to someone and then stopped, and like a lot of my friends are very open about it. They go to therapy, all for it, haven't really like stuck with it. But at some point, if you spend long enough, I imagine there are certain things, that you thought are super normal because it's just a part of you, and you need a therapist to actually walk with you and say that actually isn't normal. That's, maybe that's part of the reason why you're struggling with A, B, and C. When people come to you, and I want to focus it on, if possible, specifically people, Black or immigrant backgrounds, or any sort of background that mirrors some of the struggles that come with that. What does it take for them to come to you? Like, what are some of the stories where they're like, I really wasn't sure about this, but now I got to get here? And what are some success stories? I don't want to simplify it that way, but some breakthroughs that might have been made.
What I'm finding is that, you know, growing up, what was your idea of therapy? Your idea of therapy was either a Caucasian male or female sitting in a chair, taking notes, right? Just psychoanalyzing you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I'm finding, more people of color are running to therapy because they're finding therapists that look like them. And when
Mm-hmm.
they call, the first question they ask is, do you have Black or Latino therapists? Because
Yes.
I want to speak to someone that can relate to me. And I think many times before, they had this idea that the person sitting across from them, because what we see in movies, well, the idea of therapy was always this image. I don't think they would understand me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So the
I hear that a lot. I mean, that's something that I would want to look into, because the few experiences I've had, subconsciously I'm like, you're not going to understand a lot of this. So there's a kind of a, like, that's the person you're supposed to be able to pour everything out to. But if you don't feel like they're going to understand, then try to find somebody else. And it's not easy, right? Access is also an issue for a lot of people. And
right.
has that gotten better at all, as far as you know?
So we're booked right now, and I'm bringing on. I just hired two more new therapists and still hiring. And one of the things that I'm hearing when clients call for to set up new appointments, they always say no one has availability. Because ever since COVID, it was like people started running to therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Before, therapy was not like the end thing. It wasn't something that you really did. And if you did do it, you didn't talk about it. And now I'm finding clients, yeah, I tell they're referring everybody. This is good. I had to tell my aunt, my mom, my uncle, my cousins, that my kids, we have clients where their whole families come here because they see the benefits of it and they're like, this is good. And we have to get other people help. And that's the beauty of it. Understanding, like, if it's working for you, you don't have to tell people you're in therapy to tell them your business. But if you see something works, tell people so they can get the help that they need. But yeah, people are coming in. We're getting calls every day, people calling for couples, kids, families, individuals. People are calling me for groups. Hey, when are you going to get that? Let's talk about a group. So we're working on that. We're going to be at some schools to get that going because it's really, I don't think people understood how much of a need it was before the last few years. I'm telling you, when I came out of school, I was upset that I chose the field that I chose because we were so disrespected in the field. People didn't take us or it serious.
Oh yeah, there was a new understanding, I think, in the last couple of years. at the time that COVID hit, I was so busy. I was working. I guess still probably somewhat grieving in some ways, but I was doing artistic things. I was doing improv. I was doing acting classes, working
Nice.
out. Like I felt great, and then COVID happened. And I was like, it's fine. It'll be fine. And it's like, nobody's coming over. You're not seeing anyone. You're not doing anything. I was still working. And that was when I realized, and I'm still kind of reworking that social muscle, like, wow, there was really something I was getting from the regular social interactions or activities I was doing. And now it's like, I have to fill that space with something more intentionally. I didn't realize how much we needed people until the last couple of years.
Social interaction is huge. So when a kid is depressed, sometimes parents, an alternative is putting them on home studies, and I always advise against it. Always
Mm,
advise against it, because isolation is the first form of depression, right?
mm,
You don't
mhm,
have that connection or that contact, um, because then we don't have those experiences, and we need that. A lot of kids were struggling with the telehealth with school
mhm.
because they didn't have those social interactions. And as much as they like social media, you found a lot of kids becoming depressed when they were doing school from home.
What is it? I don't know if it will be, it may be difficult to articulate this, but what is it about interactions like that fill us? What do we get from them? Because remember pre COVID, I was like, too many social activities. I'm trying to say no to stuff. And then COVID happened. I was like, there's nothing happening. So is it energy? Is it positive energy? What is connection? Like what does that do for our mental health?
I think it's stimuli, right?
Mm,
So I'm a therapist, but if I'm in the house too long, and I love my house, I think it's beautiful. But if I'm there too long, it does something to my mood. I need to get
mhm,
out. I can't be in the same space for a long period of time every day. Just sitting in the same space is going to cause you to become depressed. One of the things we teach our clients is when you are depressed to change your environment. Go
mhm,
outside, take a walk, because you're doing something with your stimuli when you're changing your environments, because now you're seeing different things, which is putting you in a different space. Colors have a lot to do with mood. Environments have a lot to do with mood. You will be surprised how much these key factors, how much they play a part of your mood. And people don't even realize it. If you
mhm,
sit in a dark room all day, you're probably going to be in a certain type of mood. So
mhm,
it's like, get up, get out. Even if you don't talk to anyone, go for a hike, go to the park, walk around your block, but get out to change the scenery. That is huge. So when COVID hit and people were just in the house, I wasn't surprised that people were getting depressed.
mhm. Yeah, it's so interesting. Like I do for the most part work from home, but I have to like make myself go outside because I've noticed that same pattern. If I'm in the house for more than 2 days in a row, like there's just I don't know what it is. It just feels like an energy depletion. And then during COVID, no one was really telling you, people were saying, don't go out. So if you were working from home, you were just staying home all the time by yourself. And then I imagine the longer you do that, the harder it gets to get out. And then that's when I would think that's when people started to sink in to depression. There were challenges for me having to work during COVID. I mean, it was a grind in of itself. But I
Right.
also have to say, it's possible I was maybe healthier because I had that. Maybe I don't know. It was a grind nonetheless. But if I was always working from home and didn't have to get up and get myself ready every day, I may have had even less energy.
Right. Um, when people come here, you have to visit the office one day. I don't know where you're located.
I would love to.
The biggest thing they always say, it looks nice in here, right?
Mm,
My idea of a therapy office usually is like, it looks dilapidated to me. It looks like your grandmother's house. The couch and the sofa, the therapist chair. It has no rhyme or reason. Nothing matches. Nothing goes
mhm,
together. And to me, that plays a big part on mood. What you're saying is true. Like aesthetics play in a place plays a big part on mood. If I came here and I was depressed and the place looked ran down, that's not going to help my depression.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense?
It does make sense. Absolutely. Like when your house is in order and everything is prettied up and you put up a couple of things, it feels better. I don't know why, but it does feel better. When it's not in order, you're like, I feel even worse than I, do already. So absolutely, I think aesthetics is a big thing. As we wrap up, I think I want to end with a question about your book, because I think the title is really interesting, Transition of a Butterfly. And in that, answer or about the book, maybe you could just give one last sort of just strengthening point to people who may be struggling in their own way, don't know really where to start. Listening to this is, I think, a great point. Just you've been through it, and look at you. And it's, there's somebody like you, I think, can provide advice that's more relevant than maybe somebody that hasn't had some of your experiences.
Okay. Ask me your question again.
I know. It's like a question.
Have I answered all of your questions? Because when I tell you, my mind goes a mile.
Mine too. Mine too.
Okay.
As you saw there, it just went a few different points. What's sort of the core message in your book? Because that may actually answer the second question.
Okay.
Transition of a Butterfly.
So it's about a 16-year-old girl, and she's dealing with all this stress and all this trauma, not even knowing that she's dealing with trauma. And it ties into so many things. Depression. Her friend is an alcoholic. Some things happen with that. It's so relevant to today's times. And I wanted to first and foremost, I'm an educator first. Everything I touch, I don't like to just entertain you. I'm going to entertain you, but I want to teach you something. So with everything I do, I want to teach you. And so the book has so many things to learn through this girl and her experiences of what she goes through, but she transitions. Because I believe in being a conqueror, not a victim. We all go through stuff, but it's how we deal with it is what determines who we are. And so it shows you how she transitions into this butterfly when she goes through all this stuff that should have had her in a place of defeat. She overcame.
Oh, amazing. I love it. Yeah, I think that the wanting to not be a victim is like the first step to healing, because I think sometimes victimhood can be a little addictive or kind of
Mm-hmm.
a crutch.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if you see that sort of narrative in your head, I mean, again, no judgment, but there's people that, I've seen that have just kind of tied to staying a certain way, or
Excuses.
I guess that's what it is. It feels like harsh to say excuses, but I guess
Not
ultimately
harsh.
what it is.
It's true. I'm very direct, and some people can't handle it because I'm truthful. I'm even truthful to myself. I'm hard on myself. And so you can't get anywhere by lying, right? And so it's excuses. If I'm 40 years old, and I'm okay with saying that, right?
Hey, I'm not that
And
far behind
if I made excuses, because I've been through a lot, but if I sat here and said it was because I went through this and this happened and this
you.
happened, this happened, we can all say what happened because we all had something that happened. But at what point do we get up and change the narrative? Right? It's easy to be a victim because I don't have it to do anything. That's lazy thinking. But to get up and put myself together again is the most hardest part that you ever do. The hardest work in life is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, it's just the reality of it. Either you start to take steps or it just stays the same if you're lucky. And things tend to get worse if you're not dealing with them. So thank you so much for spending this time with us. So many good nuggets we're going to pull out on social media, just in terms of the tools. I want to say this feels like, hopefully 2022 is a healthier chapter for all of us. Mentally, the last couple of years have been a grind. Yeah, I'm going to claim it. I'm going to claim it.
Yeah.
We appreciate you. We appreciate this kind of connection. A lot of people happy to have this conversation. A lot of the comments I'm getting is way overdue, especially for our kind of communities where it's kind of in the background. Normalize therapy, right?
Yes, normalize therapy and let's stop surviving and let's start thriving.
Amen. We're going to end it there. Thank you so much. Hope to talk to you
Thank
soon.
you. We will
Thank you,
talk.
everybody, for tuning in.